Welcome to the Assembly of Silence Radio Hour.
And we're back.
This is two in a row now for me here.
Yeah. Well, we don't know when they're going to be broadcast.
This is true.
You know, now you've kind of like forfeited your priority location. You know, there's a whole other prioritization scheme going on right now. So I can't really say when anything's going to happen.
Wow. Okay, let's just say this is 2 times in a row we've actually gotten together.
It could well be 2 in a row.
Well, but
we'll find out.
We've done 2 podcasts.
It's true.
They may
we've
not
just
be
been sitting
published,
here. I mean, we're really... There's virtually no distance between the two. There's a glass of water. Got a glass of water, and now here we are again. Okay, before we actually start talking about something else, we have a topic. One of our listeners, who is a good friend of mine and a very intelligent guy, asked us to discuss something. And let's see if we can actually manage to do that. So Tim,
we didn't do it last time.
No, we didn't. We had planned on it. We talked about it beforehand. We hit record, and then something else happened.
We were present with what was.
That's right. The last one was all about presents. So, speaking of presents,
Timer. Wow.
So here's the question.
Yes.
The notion of conscious evolution of consciousness, and then he says, AKA, also known as alchemy or cybernetics? Is a big one. I can't help but be a denier, he says. In either constitutional on my part or just a reaction to some part of my sciencey early upbringing. I can relate to that one, Tim. However, this is legitimate for investigation as it seems to be the elephant that, with much of post-Enlightenment encouragement, is gradually taking over the room. So this question of conscious evolution of consciousness. Now, I was kind of thinking about conscious evolution. Like, there are some people who question that. Right? Some people basically have this kind of mechanistic, random mutation, natural selection, that's what's driving evolution. Right? But really, what Tim is asking here is about the evolution of consciousness. Now, I'm not sure what that really means.
Right.
Like, is consciousness evolving, or is it just a capacity?
Well, see, I had my own take on this. When I read that, what came to me is that, and this comes out of Rudolf Steiner's work, is that he talks about different epochs having different evolutions of consciousness. And so that's what really resonated with me when he spoke that. He went on to say some other things about, I think he said, the idea that humans can and are destined to, quote, evolve ourselves, unquote, in terms of biology and or consciousness, first developing the surrounding physical and intellectual environments which help define our experiences, which of course we can, or that humans as gods can and are destined to transcend our natural capacities via technology.
Right. So
that's stopping there. Like, I think we're kind of entering into this. So at some point, I want to go through like what Steiner talks about as far as evolution of consciousness with different epochs, because I think it really plays into this. Because we can't say that human consciousness is the same now as it was 20,000 years ago.
Right.
We've gone through these periods.
We do have to drill down on the term a little bit.
Right.
Because there is the capacity of consciousness, right? And then you could say there are states of consciousness. So I say what we're really talking about are states of consciousness, modes of awareness that have a variety of different objects in them. And these objects function in various ways. So it's sort of the view of the world, but the conscious facility is fundamentally the same. We have basically nerve inputs to sensory inputs to a field of awareness, right? And that's kind of that I think of as what consciousness is, with senses, with knowing is sort of the etymological root of consciousness. And it's that capacity, it's consciousness as a capacity, that allows us to develop states of consciousness where we have different ideas and kind of thought objects, you could call them, or whatever it is. The thing which makes up the tapestry of experience, something like that. Right? And I think that's what we're really talking about, is the evolution of the things within consciousness that make up the substance of experience.
Right.
And I think that to some extent what he's really drilling down on, what he's saying is, to what extent do we have conscious control over that development?
Right.
And I think that's a great question.
Yeah, boy, that is a great question. And that's a tough one to answer. Do we have conscious control over the conscious evolution, or the evolution of consciousness, I should say? Conscious control over the evolution of consciousness.
Well, I would say that the content of consciousness, so this experiential tapestry that is the substance of what we experience in our conscious being, is always conditioned by the world within which we exist.
The environment. Right, because we can look at, there's a great book by Jared Diamond, Guns, Germs, and Steel. And I don't know if you've ever read that before, but
I'm familiar with some of the ideas, but I never read it.
So he talks about why are some people still in the Stone Age, like, say, the Aboriginals in Australia. Why are they still in the Stone Age when we're, like, going to the moon?
Yeah, but some would say, well, they're actually traversing the universe, and we're stuck on.
Yeah,
so there's that
sure.
that question of, well, what is development? What is progress?
Right.
And does it really represent a step forward, in air quotes?
But what I was saying is we're byproducts of our environment.
Right. No doubt.
We're byproducts of our environment. You can look at the Vedas of India and what they said about the cosmos is being proven now by physics, right? So it's like somehow they knew the nature of time and physics and all that without having the equipment that physicists have today.
Okay, well, that seems like a whole separate subject, and I don't really know to what extent we could. I have to balance this because now we're doing the assembly of science. So
it's the assembly of science.
Yeah, we have a sub. You see, you've missed a lot of stuff, dude.
Oh my God!
Yeah, yeah. So that's an interesting. That would actually be a really fascinating thing. Maybe you should be a guest on the assembly of science.
Oh, I like that.
And present the Vedic case for the
modern physics.
That would be really fascinating. So let's put that in the. Let's put a pin on that.
We'll
bookmark it, yeah. And return to the topic before we completely lose track. So it seems to me that it's pretty much self-evident that the conditions are far more complex and out of our control than we could ever say that, okay, we could actually define how the development of consciousness is going to occur. But that's not to say that we don't have an influence. So it seems to me that we're talking about a kind of negotiation, that we have potential for a wide range of different states of consciousness, and that we can, to some extent, negotiate ourselves towards those states. But it's not a direct line. Like there are a variety of other considerations that come into play. And so if we're going to talk about we, like as a species, first of all, that's sort of absurd when it comes to states of consciousness, because at least as we're presently configured, we have a huge range of states of consciousness going on. So when we talk about human consciousness and what we are doing inside of that, it's a frickin' mess, really, right? We are definitely not all on the same page. So...
Oh, no. No. Some evolution of consciousness, we could say, is absolutely incredibly destructive, and we are destroying the planet with that mind, with that level of consciousness, right? So, meaning, like, let's just say one view is that the planet isn't really a living entity, and it's just here to be mined for resources and put a price tag on, right?
Right.
which means that you can absolutely, completely destroy everything around you and not feel any guilt around it.
Right.
Right. And then the other
Which is, if you really take a look at how life operates, that's not an unusual state of consciousness for living things to take. It's not always as successfully applied. It's not as always as catastrophic. But
very
quite often,
rarely does an organism destroy the very environment that keeps it alive.
I disagree with that. I think that organisms have a tendency to do that.
No.
Let's take a look at the
Absolutely
forests,
not.
right?
Absolutely
What
not.
happens to
not
the
to
forests?
the point where they actually destroy their own food sources and destroy their environment. An organism does not intentionally destroy its environment that keeps it
intentionally
alive.
is a different question, right? So, I don't think that human beings were, in the past, intentionally destroying their environment. I think that now we see that we've been doing it, but I think when this whole train wreck started, we thought we were just, there were too many trees to cut down, we would never cut them all down. There were so many bison, we would never kill them all. There's so many fish in the sea. How could you possibly overfish the seas?
Oh, we did intentionally kill all the bison, actually.
Well, did we go? We got to get rid of these things.
Yeah,
Is
we
that
did because it was the food source for the Native Americans, and so it was like their power source. So we literally slaughtered billions of bison
just to undermine the native.
Yeah,
that's horrible. Yeah, no, okay. I'm not trying to defend humanity here. We have definitely done some terrible things, but I'm saying that
we've been
semi-conscious.
a virus like no other in some respects.
Well, like no other. I don't know about that. Let's go back to the Lynn Margulis thing about the anaerobic bacteria. First basic, from the microbiologist's point of view, the longest period of stability of life on the planet, right? Mm-hmm. And what they did was produce the toxin that destroyed them and created the eukaryotic cell. Mm-hmm. So, you can make the argument that evolution is kind of a series of catastrophes that happen as a result of the success of this or that species. Mm-hmm. And there's an interactive quality to it. There's a degree to which every species is kind of heading towards its apparent goal. But on the path towards that goal, it slips out of their reach because they've changed the circumstances of the conditions within which they're living, often by, creating a byproduct that they can't utilize.
Which then requires deep adaptation.
Right. And that, so from that kind of deep evolutionary thrust, we could say that what humanity ended up doing in terms of innovating evolutionary strategies, survival strategies, makes perfect sense within the context of what was happening throughout all of deep evolutionary time. Mm-hmm. We just got way quicker at it.
I'm thinking about evolution of consciousness for how is our consciousness going to evolve given the fact that we've created a biological imperative for its shift. We need to shift our consciousness because it's a biological imperative at this point. If we continue down the road that we're on, we are looking at the utter, total, and complete collapse of humanity, right?
Of the biosphere.
The sixth extinction, right?
Right.
And so our consciousness...
we're already seeing basically that collapse is underway.
Exactly. So how is that biological imperative to change going to shift our consciousness? And we are in control of that, right? We're being forced into it.
Well, yeah.
We're being forced into it. So I'm not saying that we're in control of it in that way, but we have...
I think we have very limited control over it.
We have an opportunity to.
If you think of life as a consciousness playing itself out through the material that it exists in, and that the different forms of life are like different ideas within that conscious mind. Right? Then there have been a wide range of ideas within consciousness, within the Gaia consciousness, you could say, the living consciousness on Earth. And that each time that a novel form appears, the conditions change, and the conditions ripple throughout the forms, basically, the entire biosphere. And the more that there is a change, the greater the impact that it has on all the various ideas that are at play at that time. So the consciousness is constantly having to readapt. The problem that we have is that the rate of change has gotten to the point where consciousness is scrambling to keep up. We've already talked about how humanity, this is a conversation you often hear in kind of mainstream social commentary. We have not been keeping pace with our technology. The technology has developed faster than our ability to really understand it and adapt to it.
Right.
So in some respects, the change has outpaced consciousness.
Absolutely. Look at the amount of information that comes out just in a day at this point, right? I listened to a really fascinating lecture many years ago by this guy, Ian Lungold, who was a scholar of the Mayan calendar. And he talked about evolution of consciousness basically is represented in Mayan pyramids. How there's usually like 13 levels to their pyramids, and there's they get narrower each level, right? And he was talking about how that's representative of spans of time that it took for certain evolutions to take place, like the bacteria phase, right? Where bacteria ruled the earth was like so many billions of years, right? And then then something else came from that, and then that lasted so many hundreds of millions of years, and then so on and so forth, right? And so he was talking about how we've gone as humans, and with our awareness, we've gone from like tribal group soul kind of mentalities into nation state mentality, and then and just looking at the amount of information that's coming out, that he said where we were at leading up to 2012, the amount of information or evolution of consciousness that happened in, say, 19 years was happening in like a single day.
Right.
There's that much information. And what was happening in 19 years at that point is what would take typically a couple hundred years before that.
So what this does is it undermines stability. So
it's moving so fast. Awareness, consciousness, information, inundation with information. It's just happening so fast.
So you can say that the root has been slowly kind of eroded, and that the vibrational level has become more to the surface. It's not as deep.
Right.
So the changes are quicker. And less, it's bizarre, because the forces that have been mobilized now are of a type that have really never been mobilized before by living beings, as far as I can tell. We're mobilizing forces that are akin to the types of collisions that happen in, highly energetic interactions in the sun and stuff like that, So even just a combustion engine is a kind of interaction that just wasn't happening really prior, and now we're doing things on a whole other level,
Right.
So it's just not only is it happening fast, but the consequences are really difficult to map out. Like
the stakes are higher than ever right now.
So one thing that I'm noticing in the conversation that we're having is that what we were asked to talk about is the conscious evolution of consciousness.
Right.
But it's really clear that you can't really talk about that without talking about the material world as well, which is a really, I think, a beautiful way of describing that there is a fundamental marriage between consciousness and phenomena, between spirit and material, that they operate in tandem. They move along in a dialectic. They're dancing together. And so we're kind of talking about that feedback. There's conscious makes a decision. It affects what's going on. Things change, and that impresses itself upon consciousness again. And that's basically the story.
This is like, if you know who Nassim Haramein is, he talks about the unified field theory, right? So where consciousness is going out and it's influencing the ethers, so to speak, and then that feeds back and influences us in return.
But there's also a more concrete way in which consciousness determines our behaviors.
Absolutely. And this is the basic for any organism and its environment, right? So every organism is influenced by its environment, but every organism also influences its environment.
Exactly.
Right?
Yep.
So it's that feedback mechanism, but that's also in the realm of consciousness. So whatever we're putting out there in the realm of consciousness is also is going to influence the unified field, but then that's going to come back and influence us as humanity and as a whole.
So when you're saying influencing the unified field, you're kind of talking about the universal soul? Is that a...
I would say maybe that's a good way.
Is that a fair way of correlating?
Yeah, or like the universal eye, right?
So in some sense, you're saying that every individual node of consciousness, when its decision is affecting the mind of God.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Which then feeds back and is affected by the mind of God.
Right. And I think it's like in that territory, a lot of people make the mistake of saying, "Oh, well, we are all God," you know. And
yeah, that's a big mistake.
I think that's a big mistake too. We agreed on that.
Holy shit.
But yeah, I think that clearly we all play a role in this, you know, and that probably there's, I mean, who knows? We don't know, but clearly it's happening here. There's a lot of conscious beings all trying to work it out here on this planet. Are there a bunch of other planets doing it? It seems likely, you know, that and then you have this kind of hierarchy of other types of beings that aren't necessarily circumscribed to a planet. And I don't know about any of that, you know. Like
I don't either, but
it seems possible.
It seems like every indigenous culture, for the most part, speaks about beings from other planets, except for us.
Well, in a way, we do. I mean,
we do.
Like our culture. If we're going to talk about like the roots of our culture, then Europeans have the whole angel thing, you know. And then if you really read the Bible, it's in there.
Oh, it's
in there.
It's right in Genesis.
Nephilim, right?
Nephilim. The race of where the gods
mated with the
women,
daughters of men.
Yeah, exactly.
Because they found them to be attractive.
Yeah, and but you see this in the Hindu culture. You see it in ancient Sumeria. You see it. I was just watching a podcast or watching a video from a Hopi elder, and they were talking about, they have tons of lore of communications with star beings, is what they call them, So, I mean, this is...
I saw an interesting story. It's a little bit of a tangent, but it seems like it's information that would be worth throwing out. Apparently, the Navy has just installed new radar systems on some of their fighter jets, and they're starting to pick up UFOs with it. There have been like a number of pilots who have said that they've had these encounters with some kind of a UFO. It's kind of interesting to hear that coming back up again from that kind of world, not just, what is the guy, Coast to Coast or something like that.
Oh, God, Jesus. I mean, if you want to do something really fascinating sometime, go on YouTube and plug in like NASA video footage and UFOs. And you'll see like, video footage like from the space station, like NASA space station, UFOs, just, YouTube that or something. And you'll just see like these, it's the NASA camera, black and white, just showing what's going on out in space. And these ships literally just pop up, boom, boom, and shoot off. And it's just like all over the place. Like,
well, the problem is that nowadays, really, when it comes down to it, anyone with a decent production studio can fabricate that shit.
I know.
So
you don't know what's true anymore.
There's no way. It's like completely.
But
I saw an interest.
I'm going to trust what people said a long time ago more so than what people are saying today.
Well, but okay, you have to wonder to some extent, like the documents that we're looking at that are from the ancient world. I'm just playing the devil's advocate.
You always play the devil's advocate.
I still think that it's quite possible, but I'm just going to play the devil's advocate because it's like there are good kind of political reasons why you would want to have this sense of a hierarchy of different conscious beings throughout the universe. You know, it creates, what's the right way of putting it? Well, it depends on how they're painted, you know, like the picture that we have of who they are and what they want and all that kind of stuff. That plays a big role, I think, too. But the story is so important, you know, and conferring a sense of significance and a sense of relation with the great beyond, you know, that I think is something that we all yearn for so much, you know, and to have it like as part of the canon of the great wisdom is, it's like, it just makes sense that it should be there, you know, that there's a kind of a fulfillment in it that any good author would want to put in there. If you're thinking of like, okay, the people who were writing at the time, it was a very small number of people, but the people who were writing were the writers, you know, and you know how writers think. It's like they want, you know, they want like a good story that everyone's going to want to read, like, and so that it will become the currency of what it is that people discuss, you know. So within that small group initially at the higher levels of society, didn't matter what culture it was always a very small number of people who could read and write at that time, right? So my sense is that the same dynamics would come into play, you know. The story would be extremely important. You would have storytellers who were just really great at spinning a yarn, you know. Now, that's just my playing fucking devil's advocate, because it's worth going down that rabbit hole and getting a sense of, you know, it's like there's another thing that I'm just going to go quick into. Like in one of our previous episodes, we were talking about some of the ways in which the Bhagavad Gita have been used that we wouldn't want to be associated with that text if we're going to take that text as being one of great value.
Oh, right. Yeah, like
so,
slaughtering your cousins. You know,
yeah, but also apparently Heinrich Himmler, I think that's his name, in the Nazi Party, carried around a copy of the Bhagavad Gita with him at all times.
Really?
Because it helped him to commit atrocities, basically. And you can understand why, because it's basically about a warrior who doesn't want to do the terrible deeds that he has to do. And he's given this elaborate and quite beautiful
teaching,
but also it's kind of like, get out there, soldier, and do what you got to do. It's basically a military psychological manual, and it's been used that way, obviously.
Yeah.
So there are some uncomfortable.
It hurts.
I know.
It hurts. I mean, I'm just staring.
Sorry,
I'm looking
dude.
at my picture of Krishna behind you, right there. I have deep fondness in my heart for that being, and
well, I mean, even Arjuna can barely stand he cannot stand to see him in all of his glory. He has to have him put the mask back on.
Got to stop.
Yeah,
your
too
cosmic
much.
Form is too great,
and it's too terrible.
Yeah.
Yes, too great and too terrible.
Right.
And because that is the evolutionary process of consciousness. There's a lot of frickin' horror in all of that as well. And it's beauty. You know, they go hand in hand just like the spirit and the material go hand in hand.
Right.
So we can't forget that, because, you know, you erase that and...
Well, here's the thing is that, you know, coming back to the topic of the conscious evolution of consciousness, is it also predetermined by the yuga that we're in?
Yeah, exactly. I was thinking about that before, and that's... Right. Yeah, that's kind of another way of framing the kind of potential within each time for conscious development.
Right.
You
know, he throws in this piece about further down. He says, "By destined to transcend via technology, I mean not to use power tools and computers, but to instill some kind of extra human consciousness in the inorganic realm."
Yeah, just to be clear, so that's what Tim was asking, and then kind of elaborating on his question.
Yeah, but you know, and I find that to be really, you know. So here we jump into one. I mean, instilling some kind of extra human consciousness in the inorganic realm. I'm assuming by inorganic he's meaning the non-carbon based realm, right? So are we instilling consciousness in extra human consciousness into, say, crystals, into
I think he's
metals?
I think he's referring to the information technology now.
Yes, which would be crystals. I mean, information technology is based on silica and quartz. And
Interesting.
right. Those are the transducers, the transductors, and that's what's sending.
So you could think of that as all being within the metal element in Chinese 5-element theory.
Mm-hmm.
So and the metal is kind of considered the final stage that determines the next cycle through, in essence.
Mm-hmm.
So the idea that we're like instill some kind of extra human consciousness, an interesting way of putting it. That's definitely kind of the transhumanist vision, right? I mean, transhumanism has a number of different threads within it, but it seems like a lot of them are trying to figure out how can we get out of these bodies and go inhabit those machines we've been building.
Right. Yeah. How can we use those machines to enhance our bodies? You know, like our vision or the way that we see. I don't know. I'm not really deeply familiar with transhumanists. I've looked at it a little bit. It just scares the shit out of me. It freaks
it's
me out,
weird shit. But some of them are like, I want to upload my consciousness into a machine and then be able to be infinitely replicated and put into whatever kind of body I want to.
Yeah, and that scares the shit out of me.
Yeah. But I mean, the idea that you could take a consciousness from an organic being and place it in a machine, I think that's absolute insanity. I mean, I just don't see that will ever function. They may be able to create a model of a consciousness and sort of simulate a being, right?
Yeah.
I think they could do that. But, the idea that you're going to be able to take your conscious being and transpose it into a machine and then you will feel that you're a conscious being inside of this machine, I don't think that's going to work. But I do think it's possible that the machines have already developed a form of consciousness.
This whole conversation, one, just freaks me out, but two, there was you remember the old series Battlestar Galactica from the 70s? Well, there was a new version that came out in the early 2000s.
I heard it was very good. I haven't seen it.
Really good, and this is exactly.
Maybe you told me.
I may have been me. I don't know. It's but this is exactly it. Where the cyborgs or whatever they were, they started giving human consciousness to, and what they were able to do was take them and replicate them, and there was millions of this one particular one, and they looked human and they acted human, and when you killed it, they just sent another one in that had the consciousness of the last one already in it, meaning it was totally up to speed. So it had everything that one had experienced through its entire life, and then it would die, and then the next version of that one that looked just like it would come back in, or would come in, and so the consciousness
was it out for revenge, or was it just?
They
remembered that someone had.
Oh yeah. Yeah, they knew everything that had happened.
So it's like Westworld with memory between lifetimes.
I've not seen.
Oh well, I guess there was memory between lifetimes in Westworld.
This is what we're moving towards, or what we're trying to move towards.
Well, that's what they're fantasizing about.
Yeah,
that's really what it is.
Yeah.
And I think this is actually a great example of probably how it actually works. They've got a goal in mind, a few different goals, and let's say that. One of them is to be able to have this transplantable consciousness, in essence, something along those lines. Okay, so they're shooting for that, but you could be pretty damn sure that it's going to turn to something else by the time whatever it is ends up happening.
Yeah. You know what all this talk makes me just want to do?
Not talk?
No, it just makes me want to move to a third world country and just live on the land.
Are you allowed to do that anymore?
I get away from the technology. I'm just so.
I don't know where you would have to go now to really get away from the technology, because it seems like it's pretty much everywhere in one form or another. I mean, certainly, I can't remember what the number is right now, but definitely the majority of people on the planet have a cell phone.
Yeah, I know. It's kind of crazy.
And that's actually really pretty much a high-end piece of technology.
It really is.
When it comes down to how it's used and what it means for the powers that be.
Yeah. I pine for the days of the flip phone.
I got one. That's what I use.
I know. I'm jealous.
The headphone jack has stopped working. I took it in somewhere and oh, wow, you got one of those.
It's an artifact.
I think at some point it's going to be worth something. There will come a point where we're not going to have a choice. We're just all going to have smartphones.
I'm feeling the need to apologize to Tim for just like not really being able to have a conversation about the desired conversation.
I think we've been talking about it.
Have we?
Yeah, I mean, we slacked off there for a minute at the end, but I mean, I think that what we've come to is that, there's definitely an effort on the part of consciousness to develop its experiential being so that we can have a better time of it and imagine some kind of way that we'll be enjoying what it is that's happening when we get everything right, which is sort of basically like managing a consciousness. We're imagining a future state of consciousness that will be an improvement over the one that we currently have because of the various issues and problems that we're aware of.
Right. But we're not all, here's the thing is, and as you're saying that, I'm thinking some people have their idea of what is good for the world, and others, we all have our own ideas of what's good for the world, right? And I do have conscious control of the evolution of my consciousness based on what I expose myself to and what I choose to ingest, right? Not just, I'm not talking about food here. I'm talking about
all forms of nourishment.
Yeah, I'm talking about what do I ingest as far as the, technology is concerned, and so what I'm surrounding myself with. So I'm not on the transhumanist train. I'm not on the, technology is going to save the world train. So it's like we're all operating, we're all in this together, and we're all kind of coming from our own unique.
Well, yeah, that is what I think we were talking about before, that right now we have a very incoherent human consciousness, and that it's not, there are groups that have some, agreement, but in general, as a species, we're a very disagreeable bunch. We really don't agree about much. So... And as we were saying, I think in the previous episode, that in a situation where a system is filled with a lot of noise and discord and chaos, to try to chip in and add your voice to the pack just creates more chaos. And we can see that obviously that's exactly what happens in the political realm whenever people try to. It's basically a certain number of narratives that are out there that have a large number of people following them and kind of supporting them. And if anything else gets placed out there, it's just, flies on shit immediately. Just
the question here is out of all this chaos, will there come order?
Oh. Well,
one can only hope.
I think, the other thing that marches along in a marriage, the spirit and the material, it's like order and disorder are also linked in this way that, they're locked in a endless Hegelian dialectic. They can't get rid of each other.
That's right. Expansion, contraction, growth and flourishing, death and withering, and simultaneity. It's all...
It's like the farther it goes to one side, the more it's going to flip to the other side at some point.
Yeah, it's just that breathing process, isn't it?
Mm-hmm. And that's one of I think the biggest problems is that when we fix our consciousness on something, we have a tendency to think that we can get there directly. And so we lean to one side, thinking that will go the place where we want it to.
Right.
But that dialectic always pulls it the other way. So it's, the influence game is very non-intuitive, you might say.
Yeah, all the more reason to strive towards equanimity of emotions and staying in the now, staying in the present moment.
Well, there is this idea that I think it's in a number of different traditions where the priestly class, what they were really doing was holding the world together.
Yeah.
And so by neutralizing thought objects and reconnecting with the universal soul, they were providing enough stability for things to continue and not get completely off pace, not get completely messed up.
In the Mahabharata, they talk about how it was the king's responsibility through the king's integrity and dharma, their ability to lead a dharmic life of truth and values. That actually is what controlled the weather. So like when the king's first duty was to his people and made sure that everybody was fed, everyone was cared for, that there was peace and order in his kingdom, and he lived a life of truth and integrity and honesty, and by living like that and maintaining that for his people, his kingdom, that actually is what influenced the weather patterns. It ensured the rains came on time.
Harmony between heaven and earth
Absolutely.
Is the way that they would phrase it, and they call it the philosopher sage, philosopher kings.
Yeah, and that's what. And during that time of the Mahabharata and like the Ramayana, the kings were, they were known as Kshatriyas, and they were like a kingly, priestly. They weren't like priests, but they learned all the Vedas. They studied the Vedas. They were adept in war and in religion. Right, so they were like priests, kings, and warriors, and
so you could say that the Bhagavad Gita is an illustration of that integration,
right? And Rudolf Steiner says that that all the crazy weather fluctuations and violence on the earth, like say volcanic eruptions and things like that, were all coming from unchecked will forces of humanity.
I think that's perhaps more of a driver of climate change than is ever acknowledged.
Absolutely. We could look at climate as the soul of the earth.
Right.
Right.
So it's like when you're irritated, if your bowels are irritated, right, the whole body is irritated.
Right.
So
when all of humanity is irritated,
then the whole earth
is irritated.
That's right.
Absolutely. There's that feedback system again, right? Environment to the organism to the environment. You can't get away from that, and that's not. We can't sit around and think that our emotions don't have an effect on this planet,
and also that
and
somehow or another that it just comes down to a matter of individual. Because if you think of the planet as a living organism and that it's irritated because there's a species that's particularly aggravating, right? Well, that's like the whole picture right there, right? Clearly that's what needs to be addressed. We don't need to think about like all the various details of each individual human being.
Exactly.
Like, how do we just calm this thing down? Right?
That's right.
And reintegrate back into the system that we're living in. That really would be the best way to go. So it seems like the answer is to love God, just like to put our attention and dissolve ideas. So maybe what the Assembly of Silence is really about is to bring up all these ideas and then dissolve them, just like the practice that's being described here.
Yeah, and that's a very Rosicrucian practice. Is to develop an image in your mind's eye and then dissolve it. Create an image, hold it, and then dissolve it. I think, when you just said, so the thing to do is to love God, I mean, Christ really summed it up, right? When he was asked, what's the greatest commandment? He said to love the Lord God with all your heart, soul, strength, and mind, and then to love your neighbor as you love yourself. But the catch here is, how well do you love yourself?
Right. Well, and
do
then
you
the
love
catch,
yourself?
then the catch is, what is the self that we're talking about?
That's right, exactly.
Because if it really is the self that we're talking about here, it's the self of God.
Yeah.
So
it's the eternal self.
The eternal self.
It's the one that always was, always will be.
And so in that case, the individual self doesn't matter.
Right. But
really sit with that one?
Yeah. I mean, that's big. Yet here we are in these bodies, right? And these minds and these emotions. And so as far as I can tell from my life is that loving myself is forgiving myself, is being compassionate with myself, cultivating self-empathy, and being able to accept my humanity.
Which means seeing yourself as others and seeing others as yourself.
Exactly. Realizing there's no separation. That's only an illusion. There's that.
But it's a very real illusion.
Oh, it's a very real illusion.
Yeah.
Right? Because, I mean, there are others, it seems like, yet... I mean, Ramana Maharshi was asked once. Ramana Maharshi was once asked, Ramana, how should I treat others? And his response was, "There are no others." And that's really
it's a great response, but it's one of those things. It's like, okay, how do you integrate that into ordinary life?
Right. You integrate that into ordinary life by treating every single person you come in contact with like you would want to be treated yourself, right?
Yeah, so that's the old do not do unto others as you would not have them do unto you.
Exactly.
Right.
Realizing that if I'm hurting you,
the golden rule.
If I hurt you, I'm hurting me.
Mm-hmm.
Right? And that's true. There's truth in that. If I hurt you, I'm causing you pain, which in the essence of my being, that's creating pain. It doesn't feel good to hurt somebody.
Well, I guess some people apparently take pleasure in that.
I think that's where you're going to start getting into, there's a sickness involved with that too, right? So in the highest
so that
level,
would probably be like a fair amount of self-hatred, I think, in that circumstance.
Exactly. So I think this evolution of consciousness, or the conscious evolution of consciousness, I think it's all, if you love God with all your heart, soul, strength, and mind, and love your neighbor as you love yourself, the rest takes care of itself. It's great to be back.
Oh, thanks for coming back.
Yeah.
Thanks for listening. If you like what you heard, throw us a bone by subscribing to this channel, visiting our social media pages, and hitting the various like, love, and clap buttons. We welcome all comments, criticisms, and random thoughts. Our email is silentassembly@protonmail.com. And if you want to be an angel, we have a Patreon page. We look forward to serving you again soon. In the meantime, remember, turn that thing over a few times before you pick it up and take it home.